On the northern coast of Peru, there is a land where the desert meets the sea, a place where rolling dunes descend into the blue waters of the Pacific, and dry winds carry the scent of salt and dust. It is a harsh land, silent and endless, yet for centuries it cradled a civilization of astonishing power and beauty. This was the world of the Moche, between the 1st and 7th centuries of our era. Long before the Incas built Machu Picchu, the Moche raised their pyramids of adobe brick, painted their walls with gods and warriors, and dug canals that turned desert valleys into green fields. They left no written records, no chronicles carved in stone, no words pressed into clay. What survives are fragments, murals faded by time, ceramics shaped by careful hands, skeletons buried in sand, and ruins of temples built from millions of sun-baked bricks. And through these fragments, a story whispers mysterious, incomplete, yet powerful. To stand in a Moche valley at dawn is to feel both desolation and promise. The sun rises quickly over the Andes in the east, flooding the desert with gold. The rivers, thin ribbons of life, cut across the emptiness, carrying meltwater down from distant mountains. Along their banks, ancient canals branch like veins, feeding fields of maize, beans, and cotton. Without water, the land is death. With it, the land becomes a miracle. The Moche mastered this fragile balance. They built their homes and temples close to these rivers, creating oases of green in an ocean of sand. Their survival was a triumph of engineering as much as faith. Where others saw desert, they saw potential. Where others saw barrenness, they raised cities. And what cities they built. At the heart of their world stood two great monuments, the Huaca del Sol, the Temple of the Sun, and the Huaca de la Luna, the Temple of the Moon. Rising above the desert floor, these stepped pyramids were constructed from millions of adobe bricks, each one stamped with the mark of its maker. The Huaca del Sol, now partly destroyed by floods and Spanish treasure hunters, may once have stood over 40 meters tall, one of the largest adobe structures ever built in the ancient world. The Huaca de la Luna, its smaller companion, still preserves vibrant murals, warriors with painted faces, priests in elaborate costumes, gods with fanged mouths and staring eyes. The walls tell stories without words of rituals, of offerings, of battles fought not just for land, but for the favor of the divine. For the Moche were not only builders, they were believers. Their gods lived in the forces of nature, in the sun that scorched the desert, in the moon that governed tides, in the sea that gave both fish and storms. But their gods were not gentle. They demanded respect, and often they demanded blood. Ceramics and murals show scenes that unsettle the modern eye. Warriors leading captives, priests cutting throats, blood collected in goblets and offered to the gods. These were not acts of cruelty alone, they were acts of faith. The Moche believed that sacrifice renewed the world, that the lifeblood of captives fed the cycle of fertility, ensured rain, and kept the delicate balance between desert and river intact. It was a bargain with the divine, written not in words but in blood and earth. Yet, amid these fierce beliefs, the Moche also created works of delicate beauty. Their pottery, unmatched in the ancient Americas, captured human faces with uncanny realism. Stern warriors, smiling children, rulers adorned with jewelry, even scenes of everyday life fishing, weaving, feasting through their clay vessels. The Moche left us portraits more intimate than any written record. They show us a people proud, creative, and deeply aware of the world around them. Their metalwork, too, reveals their brilliance. They hammered gold into thin sheets, cast silver ornaments, and crafted intricate jewelry. The tombs of their lords, discovered in the late 20th century, dazzled archaeologists, with treasures rivaling those of Egypt. Necklaces of turquoise, headdresses of copper and gold, staffs inlaid with precious stones, all testaments to a society that valued artistry as much as power. But the Moche were also children of the desert. Their lives were tied to forces they could not control. The rains, the rivers, the sea. Every few decades, the climate betrayed them. The phenomenon we call El Niño brought torrential rains that turned their carefully tended valleys into torrents of mud and ruin. Other times, drought stretched for years, leaving fields barren and canals dry. In those times, the gods seemed angry, and the rituals grew darker, the sacrifices more desperate. It is here, in this fragile dance between creation and destruction, that we begin to understand the Moche. They lived on the edge between desert and sea, between order and chaos, between survival and collapse. Tonight, as we let the quiet of history settle, imagine standing at the foot of the Huaca de la Luna. The desert air is cool, the stars blaze overhead. The murals on the temple walls glow faintly in torchlight, priests painted red and black, gods with fanged smiles. Beyond the walls, farmers sleep in their adobe homes. Fishermen dream of the sea. Artisans shape clay by moonlight. And somewhere in the distance, the river murmurs, carrying water through the desert, as it did for centuries. The Moche are gone, their voices silent, but their world still whispers in the ruins, in the broken pots, in the faded murals of gods and men. This is the beginning of their story, a story carved not in words, but in earth, fire, and faith. On the desert coast of northern Peru, where the wind sculpts the dunes and the sun burns the earth into shades of red and gold, two immense shapes rise above the plain. They are not mountains, though from a distance they seem as timeless. They are not natural ridges, though they dominate the horizon. They are monuments built not of stone, but of clay and water, molded by human hands. These are the Huacas, the temples of the sun and the moon, and they are the heart of the Moche world. The Huaca del Sol, the temple of the sun, once towered nearly 40 meters high, its vast bulk rising in terraces against the desert sky. It was the largest structure ever built in the Americas from adobe bricks. Archaeologists estimate that more than 140 million bricks were used in its construction. Each brick carried a maker's mark, symbols pressed into wet clay before it was dried in the sun. Some marks were geometric, others simple strokes or curves. These symbols reveal that the bricks were not all made by the same workers, but by many different communities. Each mark was like a signature, showing the tribute of villages and clans brought together to raise the sacred mountain. The Huaca de la Luna, the temple of the moon, stood nearby, slightly smaller but more richly adorned. Its walls were covered with painted murals, reds, yellows, blues that still cling to the adobe after 15 centuries. Figures of warriors, priests, and gods cover the surfaces, each telling fragments of the Moche vision of the world. To the people of the Moche, these huacas were not merely buildings. They were sacred mountains, man-made echoes of the Andes in the distance, places where the divine touched the earth. Imagine the construction. Thousands of workers carrying baskets of clay, mixing it with water and straw, pressing it into molds. Brick after brick, layer after layer, rising toward the sky. It was not built in one lifetime, nor even two. Generations worked on the huacas, each adding to what their ancestors had begun. For the Moche, to build was itself a form of worship. Every brick carried not just clay, but devotion, and because adobe is fragile, the Moche developed a unique method of construction. Rather than repairing damaged walls, they would often bury them within new layers. A temple was not a single building, it was a living thing, growing outward and upward, old walls, entombed within new, murals painted over murals, generation upon generation. Like the rings of a tree, the huacas held within them the memory of centuries. The murals of the Huaca de la Luna are among the most vivid windows into Moche belief. One recurring figure dominates, a deity modern scholars call the Decapitator God. He is depicted with a fearsome, fanged face, sometimes as a spider, sometimes as a warrior, holding in one hand a blade and in the other the severed head of a captive. To the Moche, he embodied both death and fertility, reminding them that sacrifice nourished the gods, and through the gods, crops and the people. Other murals show processions of warriors, richly dressed priests, and rituals filled with music and dance. Blood sacrifice is not hidden but celebrated, painted boldly in the center of sacred space. For the Moche, the huacas were theaters of the divine, where the drama of life and death was performed before the eyes of gods and men alike. The Huaca del Sol, by contrast, was more administrative and political, while the Huaca de la Luna was the sacred heart of ritual. The Temple of the Sun housed the palaces of rulers, storerooms for tribute, and the offices of those who governed the valleys. Together, the two temples represented the dual nature of power in Moche society, one rooted in faith, the other in rule. And between them stretched a great plaza. Here, thousands of people could gather to witness ceremonies, to watch sacrifices, to feel themselves part of a cosmic order. Imagine the scene. Drums pounding, conch shells sounding, the smell of incense and blood in the air, the walls alive with color. At the top of the Huaca, priests raise goblets to the sky, offering the lifeblood of captives to the gods. Below, the people watch, silent, awed, believing that in these acts lay the survival of their world. The Huacas were also symbols of resilience. In times of natural disaster, when the rains of El Niño washed across the valleys, or when earthquakes shook the land, the people turned to the temples. Rituals grew more intense, sacrifices more frequent. The temples stood as anchors in a shifting, dangerous landscape. Even when nature seemed to rage against them, the Moche believed the Huacas bound them to the gods, giving them strength to endure. But time is relentless. The Huaca del Sol suffered terribly in later centuries. Spanish colonists diverted a river through its base, washing away much of the pyramid in their hunt for treasure. Today, only a fraction remains, scarred but still immense. The Huaca de la Luna, protected by centuries of burial under desert sands, survived in better condition, its murals still glowing faintly with the colors of another age. Standing there now, in the quiet desert wind, the temples seem both eternal and fragile. They whisper of glory and faith, but also of impermanence. Adobe, for all its strength in number, is still clay. It crumbles beneath rain, it softens beneath flood, and yet, after 1,500 years, the Huacas still rise from the desert, guardians of a story too powerful to be erased. Tonight, as we listen in the stillness, picture the valley long ago. Thousands of hands raising bricks to the sky. Priests painting walls with gods of fangs and wings. Crowds gathered in the plaza, eyes fixed on the rituals above. The temples were not ruins then, they were alive, humming with the heartbeat of a civilization. And though the Moche are gone, their Huacas still breathe, their bricks still carry the fingerprints of those who made them, and their murals still gaze out with silent, fanged smiles. The desert holds their memory. The pyramids of clay still whisper that here, once, the Moche called upon their gods and built mountains in their name. On the northern coast of Peru, the land is a paradox. A narrow strip of fertile valleys lies pressed between two vast forces, the Pacific Ocean to the west and the high spine of the Andes to the east. Beyond the rivers, all is desert dry, relentless, unforgiving. It is a place where rain rarely falls, where the sun scorches the soil into dust, and where survival depends on water carried from far away. And yet, for 6 centuries, the Moche transformed this fragile landscape into a kingdom of abundance. They did not conquer it with weapons. They mastered it with water. The Moche understood that life in the desert meant living in rhythm with rivers. Fed by the snowmelt of the Andes, streams tumbled down the mountains, carving narrow valleys before losing themselves in the sands. The Moche learned to catch these rivers before they disappeared. They dug channels that carried the water for miles, diverting it into fields, guiding it with care so that not a drop was wasted. Some of these canals stretched longer than entire valleys, linking rivers together to spread fertility farther than nature intended. They were lined with stone in places, strengthened with clay in others. Even today, traces of these ancient irrigation systems survive, silent testimony to the engineering genius of a people who never wrote their plans, but who carved their solutions into the earth itself. Thanks to this mastery, the desert bloomed. Fields of maize rose tall, their golden ears swaying in the dry wind. Cotton fields spread white across the valley floors, feeding the looms of Moche weavers. Beans, squash, and peanuts filled storerooms. The Moche even cultivated chili peppers, whose fire added flavor to their stews. In the canals, they raised fish. In the fields, they domesticated llamas and alpacas, whose wool clothed them and whose meat sustained them. From the sea, they drew riches of another kind, Anchovies, sea bass, and shellfish harvested in great quantities, carried inland and dried to last the year. The Moche were not simply survivors of the desert, they were farmers, herders, and fishermen, weaving together sea and land, mountain and plain, into a single web of life. But the balance was delicate. The coast of Peru is shaped by one of the most powerful climate forces on Earth, El Niño. Every few decades, warm currents shifted in the Pacific, bringing torrential rains to a land unprepared for them. Valleys that had been carefully irrigated became rivers of mud. Canals overflowed, fields drowned, adobe homes dissolved into clay. Other times, the opposite occurred: years of drought, when rivers shrank, canals dried, and crops withered. For a people so dependent on water, these cycles were devastating, and yet the Moche endured. They rebuilt their canals, repaired their fields, and when necessary, turned to their gods for help. In times of flood or drought, rituals intensified. Priests climbed the Huaca de la Luna, offering blood and prayers to appease the deities of mountain and sea. Sacrifice was not cruelty, it was survival, a plea to restore balance to a world on the edge of chaos. The genius of the Moche lay not only in engineering but in organization. To dig canals of such size required planning, labor, and cooperation. Whole communities worked together, carrying baskets of soil, shaping embankments, guiding the flow of water. Marks stamped on adobe bricks show that different groups contributed to temple building. The same principle applied to canals. It was society itself, united by necessity, that transformed desert into farmland. This cooperation, however, was also a source of power. Control of water meant control of life. Those who ruled the canals, the lords and priests, ruled the people. They decided when water flowed, whose fields were irrigated, whose crops survived. In a land where water was everything, leadership and religion merged into one. Yet for all their brilliance, the Moche could never fully command nature. Evidence suggests that a series of extreme El Niño events in the 6th and 7th centuries may have helped unravel their world. Floods tore apart canals, followed by droughts that parched the valleys. Fields failed, hunger spread, faith was tested. As the climate shifted, so too did the balance of power. Some communities may have abandoned their valleys, others rebelled against their rulers. The great temples fell silent, not because the Moche forgot how to farm, but because the earth itself betrayed them. And still, the traces of their mastery remain. Walk today in the Moche valleys, and you may find faint lines across the land. Ancient canals, long dry but still visible, stand among them, and you will sense the hands that once dug, the water that once flowed, the life that once bloomed in the desert. Tonight, as we drift into quiet, imagine the valley in its prime. The sun sets behind the Andes, casting long shadows across the fields. Water glimmers in canals, weaving silver paths through the desert. Farmers tend to maize and cotton. Fishermen return with nets heavy from the sea. Children laugh along the riverbank, while priests raise prayers to the mountains. This was the genius of the Moche, not only building pyramids of clay, but turning sand into sustenance, desert into garden. They were masters of water, and through water, masters of survival. In the valleys of the northern Peruvian coast, the Moche built not only temples and canals, but a social order as intricate as their irrigation systems. It was a world divided between rulers and ruled, warriors and farmers, priests and artisans, yet bound together by shared faith and survival. The Moche left no written records to explain their hierarchy. Instead, their murals, pottery, and tombs reveal the structure of their society. And through these fragments, we glimpse a world where power was both sacred and absolute. At the very top stood the lords of the Moche, rulers who were both kings and priests. They governed not only with authority but with divine mandate. Their power flowed from the temples as much as from their armies. When they presided over rituals at the Huaca de la Luna, dressed in headdresses of copper and feathers, they did not appear as mere men. They became the living representatives of gods. To obey them was not just politics, it was faith. The tomb of the Lord of Sipán, discovered in 1987, confirms the grandeur of these rulers. Buried in splendor, his body lay adorned with gold and silver ornaments, turquoise inlays, and a crown shaped like a crescent moon. Around him were retainers, sacrificed to accompany him into the afterlife, and animals, llamas, and dogs to serve him beyond death. Every object in the tomb spoke of wealth, power, and sacred authority. The rulers of the Moche were not distant figures, they were the axis upon which the entire society turned. Beside the lords stood the priests, guardians of ritual and keepers of cosmic balance. They directed sacrifices, interpreted omens, and ensured that the gods received their due. Priests appeared in murals wearing elaborate costumes, masks with fangs, staffs crowned with divine symbols, capes shimmering with metal discs. They transformed themselves into living embodiments of the divine during ceremonies, channeling gods who demanded blood, water, and devotion. Religion in Moche society was not separate from power, it was power. The ability to commune with gods gave priests immense influence, and their role in rituals bound the people to the temples. When drought or flood struck, it was the priests who stood at the center of public life, guiding sacrifices meant to restore order. Next came the warriors. They were both protectors and instruments of ritual. Moche art often depicts warriors in processions, carrying clubs, shields, and headdresses. But their battles were not simply for conquest. Often, they fought ceremonial duels, where the goal was not to kill, but to capture. The defeated were stripped of armor, bound, and led to the temples, where they became sacrifices to the gods. In this way, war itself became a form of ritual, a means of feeding the divine order with captives. Victory was not just political, but sacred, reinforcing the ruler's right to govern and the god's dominion over nature. Beneath the elite stood the artisans and craftsmen. Though they lacked political power, their skill gave them a voice in society. Moche ceramics are among the most detailed in the ancient Americas, capturing scenes of daily life with astonishing realism. Portrait vessels show individual faces, wrinkled elders, stern warriors, women with delicate features. Through them, artisans preserved a record of people who lived 15 centuries ago, their expressions still alive in clay. Metalworkers, too, were vital. They hammered gold into headdresses, shaped silver into nose ornaments, and created copper tools that blended beauty with function. Their artistry filled the tombs of lords and the rituals of priests, binding them to the highest circles of power. And then there were the farmers and fishermen, the backbone of Moche life. They lived in modest adobe homes near the canals and rivers. By day, they tended maize and beans, cared for herds, or cast nets into the Pacific. By night, they returned to families, telling stories, weaving cloth, and preparing simple meals of fish, maize, and chili. Though humble, their work sustained the entire society. Without their harvests and catches, the temples would stand empty, the lords powerless, the priests unable to perform rituals. Their labor fed the pyramids of adobe, brick by brick, crop by crop. At the very bottom of society were the captives and slaves. Warriors taken in battle were often paraded through the city, stripped of their dignity, and sacrificed upon temple platforms. Others may have been forced into labor, building canals or carrying tribute. For the Moche, the line between human and offering was thin, and the fate of the defeated was often sealed in blood. The divisions in Moche society were stark, yet each group played a role in sustaining the whole. It was a world where religion and politics fused, where art and war intertwined, where the labor of many upheld the splendor of few. Imagine the valley on a festival day. In the plaza between the Huacas, thousands gather. At the top of the pyramid, the Lord King appears, his headdress gleaming in the sun. Beside him stand priests, cloaked in feathers and metal, ready to perform the rites. Below, warriors march in procession, their captives bound and trembling. Artisans display offerings of gold and clay, while farmers bring baskets of maize and beans. Each person, from ruler to captive, has a place in the ceremony. Each role reinforces the structure of society. The people watch in silence, knowing that in these rituals lies the order of the universe itself. Tonight, as we rest, let us picture that society once more. A world where lords ruled like gods, priests spoke with the divine, warriors fought not for land but for sacrifice, artisans shaped beauty from clay and metal, and farmers carried the weight of it all on their shoulders. It was a society of lords and commoners, bound together by faith and survival, And though the Moche are gone, their world still lingers in the murals, in the tombs, in the silent gaze of clay faces that have watched the centuries pass. When words are absent, objects must speak. The Moche left no alphabet, no carved chronicles, no scrolls of history, but they left clay, and in clay they told their stories with more intimacy than any inscription could. From the valleys of northern Peru have emerged thousands of ceramic vessels, each one a fragment of a vanished world. Together, they form a library not of letters, but of faces, bodies, rituals, and lives. The most striking of these are the portrait vessels. Unlike the abstract or symbolic art of many ancient peoples, the Moche created faces of astonishing realism, warriors with stern gazes, elders with furrowed brows, women with delicate features, even children, each one modeled in 3 dimensions, each unique. No two portraits are the same. It is as if the Moche sought to preserve individual identity, to grant immortality not through words, but through form. Some scholars believe these portraits represent actual people, rulers, priests, or respected warriors. Others suggest they depict archetypes of society. Whatever the case, they are among the most human relics of the ancient Americas. To look upon a Moche portrait vessel is to feel, across 15 centuries, the steady gaze of someone who once lived, breathed, and belonged to a world now gone. Beyond portraits, Moche ceramics also capture narratives. On the surfaces of their vessels, they painted or sculpted scenes of daily life. Fishermen hauling nets from the Pacific, farmers tending maize, women weaving cloth, hunters with slings and dogs. There are depictions of music and dance, of feasts and games, of illness and healing. Some even show medical procedures, trepanation, where a hole was drilled into the skull, perhaps to treat injury or spiritual affliction. Other vessels depict myths and rituals, gods with fanged mouths, priests in elaborate costumes, captives being led to sacrifice. These were not merely decorative. They were visual texts, encoding the spiritual and social life of the Moche in clay. Equally remarkable is the erotic pottery of the Moche. Hundreds of vessels depict explicit sexual acts, scenes that startled early archaeologists and remain unique in the ancient world. They portray intimacy not as hidden or shameful, but as a natural part of existence, woven into cycles of fertility and the sacred. Some scholars see them as instruction, others as ritual symbolism, linking sexuality to agricultural fertility, reproduction, and the renewal of life. For the Moche, even this aspect of humanity found its place in clay, unflinching, honest, eternal. If clay gave the Moche their voice, metal gave them their brilliance. They were among the greatest metallurgists of the pre-Columbian Americas. From the mines of the Andes, they drew gold, silver, and copper, shaping them into ornaments of breathtaking complexity. They hammered sheets of gold into thin, flexible layers, then cut and shaped them into crowns, chest plates, and jewelry. They cast intricate ornaments using the lost wax technique, a method that allowed them to create delicate detail. They experimented with alloys, blending copper with silver or gold to achieve colors that shimmered differently in the sun. Objects found in elite tombs speak of this mastery. The Lord of Sipán was buried with a dazzling array of ornaments, necklaces of gold and turquoise, silver bells, shields of gilded copper, and headdresses that would have gleamed like fire in the desert light. Each item was both decoration and symbol, a declaration of sacred power. But Moche artistry was not only about beauty, it was about communication. A golden nose ornament was not just an accessory, it marked the wearer as a figure of divine authority. A ceramic vessel was not only a container, it was a story, a ritual, a memory. Art was not separate from life. It was life, recorded in form and color. Through art, the Moche built continuity between generations. A pot painted with a myth could carry that story into households far from the temples. A necklace worn by a priest could signal his bond with gods to all who saw him. Every object was both functional and symbolic, speaking in a language of materials that all could understand. And yet, fragility lingers in this legacy. Clay breaks, metals tarnish. Many Moche works were lost to time, washed away by rains or buried by desert sands, but those that survive tell us more than any written archive might have. They tell us not only what the Moche did, but how they saw with eyes fixed on detail, with minds that honored both the ordinary and the sacred, with hands that shaped memory into matter. Imagine, for a moment, a Moche artisan at work. He sits in the shade of an adobe wall, clay soft in his hands. Around him, the desert hums with wind. Slowly, he shapes a vessel, pinching, smoothing, sculpting a face into being. He knows this vessel may carry water or chicha beer, may be placed in a tomb, may stand in a ritual. Whatever its fate, it will carry part of him, his skill, his touch, his vision of the world. And somewhere else, a metalworker hammers gold on a stone, listening to the rhythm of his blows. He polishes the sheet until it gleams, shaping it into a headdress that will catch the sun. When the Lord wears it atop the Huaca, the light itself will crown him in fire. Tonight, as we drift into rest, let us picture this world of clay and metal, faces staring from ceramic vessels, each one a silent witness, golden ornaments catching the light of the desert sun, objects both fragile and eternal, carrying across centuries the whispers of a vanished civilization. The Moche may not have left words, but in art, they left their memory, and in clay and metal, they still speak. The Moche world was a land of extremes, fertile valleys carved into desert, rivers flowing through dust, seas both generous and deadly. To survive here, the people needed more than canals and fields. They needed to believe, and so they built a religion woven into every breath of life. A faith where gods lived in the mountains, the rivers, the sky, and the sea. A faith where blood was not only the essence of life, it was the language by which mortals spoke to the divine. The Moche pantheon was vast and fluid, shaped by the forces of nature around them. The moon was perhaps the most powerful celestial being. On this coast, where nights are bright and tides are strong, the moon governed the rhythms of both land and sea. It was protector and destroyer, a guide for planting and a warning of floods. The sun, blazing over the desert, was honored but feared. Its heat gave life to maize and cotton, yet it could scorch the valleys into ruin. The people offered prayers so that its fire would sustain, not destroy. The sea was both gift and terror. It fed the Moche with anchovies and shellfish, yet it unleashed storms that wrecked boats and drowned fishermen. They believed marine gods dwelled beneath the waves, shimmering, dangerous beings who demanded respect and sacrifice. And in the mountains, towering over the desert, lived gods of rain and water. From their icy peaks came the rivers that made survival possible. If angered, they withheld their gifts, bringing drought and despair. But the most striking figure in Moche belief was the Decapitator God. He appears again and again in murals and pottery. A fanged face, fierce eyes, sometimes part human, sometimes part animal spider, owl, or serpent. In one hand, he holds a ceremonial knife, in the other, a severed human head. To the Moche, he was not only a god of death, but a god of renewal. The taking of head symbolized the taking of power, the release of life force, the nourishment of earth and sky. In his terrifying image lay the promise of continued existence. Religion was not a private act. It was performed before thousands, upon the stages of the Huaca de la Luna and other temples. Murals depict elaborate ceremonies known today as the sacrifice ritual. In them, warriors fought in ritual combat. The defeated were stripped of armor, bound, and led in procession to the priests. There, on high platforms, their throats were cut, their blood collected in goblets. Priests, dressed in elaborate costumes, raised the goblets to the gods, sometimes drinking the blood themselves as a channel between mortal and divine. The murals show the ritual repeated again and again. Captives kneeling, priests with knives, gods watching from painted walls. For the Moche, this was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a cosmic necessity. Blood was the bridge between worlds, ensuring rain, fertility, and order. Without it, the delicate balance of life might collapse. The sacrifices were often accompanied by festivals. Conch shells sounded, drums pounded, dancers moved in elaborate patterns, and incense curled into the desert air. The entire community gathered to witness, from lords on the platforms to commoners in the plaza below. In these moments, society itself was reaffirmed. The rulers, dressed as gods, proved their power. The priests displayed their communion with the divine. And the people, watching, felt the awe and terror of a world held together by ritual. Yet Moche religion was not only about death, it was also about fertility, healing, and continuity. Pottery scenes show ceremonies involving food, music, and dance. Some depict shamans transforming into animals, suggesting beliefs in journeys between human and spiritual realms. Others show rituals of marriage and childbirth, linking human cycles to cosmic cycles. The Moche believed the boundary between worlds was thin. The living and the dead, the human and the divine, the ordinary and the sacred, they overlapped, intertwined, and met in ritual. Still, the darker side of their faith is what lingers most vividly. Archaeological excavations at Huaca de la Luna have uncovered actual remains of sacrificed captives, young men, many with cut throats or broken bones, buried at the foot of the temple. Some appear to have been killed after battles. Others may have been offerings during times of natural disaster. When floods or droughts struck, the need for sacrifice only grew more desperate. In this way, Moche religion mirrored the harshness of their world. Just as crops demanded water, gods demanded blood. Just as rivers both gave life and took it away, so too did the divine. Imagine standing in the great plaza during one of these rituals. The desert sun beats down. Drums echo off the adobe walls. Atop the Huaca, a priest in a mask of fangs lifts a goblet filled with fresh blood. Below, thousands watch in silence, knowing that this act is not cruelty but survival, that in the lifeblood of captives lies the future of the fields, the rivers, the people. And as the sun sets, the murals glow in the fading light. Gods with open mouths, demanding, watching, eternal. Tonight, as we let our minds drift, we can almost hear those echoes. The conch shells, the chants, the sharp crack of drums. The Moche believed that through sacrifice, they held the universe together, that without blood, the gods would turn away, and the desert would reclaim the valleys. It is a vision both unsettling and profound, a world where faith and fear walked hand in hand, and where the gods of blood and earth ruled over every breath of life. In the Moche world, to be a warrior was not only to fight, it was to serve the gods. Battles were not waged simply for conquest or territory, but for captives. For in the eyes of the Moche, the greatest prize of war was not land, but blood. On the walls of the Huaca de la Luna, brightly painted murals still show the sacrifice ceremony. Warriors, richly dressed, march in processions. The defeated, stripped of armor, are bound with ropes and led forward. Priests, wearing masks and headdresses, wait with knives and goblets. The blood of the vanquished becomes the offering that sustains the universe. This was the cycle of Moche warfare: capture, procession, sacrifice. The battles themselves were often fought not between great armies, but through ritual combat. Archaeological evidence and ceramic depictions suggest that pairs or small groups of warriors faced each other in duels. Weapons included clubs, slings, and spear throwers. Armor was made of quilted cotton, strong yet flexible, and shields were carried for defense. The goal was not slaughter, the goal was capture. To defeat an enemy meant to strip him of his armor, bind his hands, and bring him back alive. A dead foe was of little use to the gods. A living one was the true prize. The warriors of the Moche were celebrated in art. Portrait vessels show them with stern eyes, helmets decorated with animals, noses and cheeks painted for battle. They were not anonymous soldiers, but individuals whose deeds were remembered in clay. Victory on the battlefield meant honor not only for the man, but for his lineage. And yet, for the defeated, the fate was grim. Stripped and humiliated, captives were paraded before the community, their submission a public reminder of the ruler's power and the gods' demands. Some were held in pens near the temples, waiting for the appointed day of sacrifice. The sacrifice ritual was more than execution, it was theater, faith, and politics combined. In the plaza below the Huacas, thousands gathered to witness. Drums beat, conch shells sounded, dancers moved in patterns of ritual meaning. The rulers appeared dressed as gods, their costumes shimmering with gold, copper, and feathers. Priests, masked with fanged visages, enacted the roles of divine beings. The captives were brought forward, their throats cut with ceremonial knives. Their blood was caught in goblets, lifted high, and offered to the gods. Some accounts suggest that rulers or priests drank from these goblets, symbolically consuming the life force of the fallen. To the people watching, this was not cruelty, it was renewal. It was the assurance that the cycle of rain and fertility would continue, that the gods were satisfied, that the order of the cosmos remained intact. But the warrior's role extended beyond ritual combat. He was also enforcer of power. The Moche state was built on canals, temples, and faith, but also on strength. When vassal communities rebelled, when rivals threatened the valleys, warriors were dispatched to restore order. Their victories fed not only the security of the realm, but also the ritual calendar of the priests. War and sacrifice, therefore, were inseparable. The battlefield was the first stage, the temple the final one. From capture to bloodletting, the cycle linked society together, uniting rulers, priests, and commoners in shared spectacle. Archaeology has uncovered haunting evidence of these rituals. At Huaca de la Luna, excavations revealed the remains of dozens of young men, sacrificed over decades. Many bore cut marks on their necks, confirming the ritual throat-slitting shown in the murals. Others had broken bones, suggesting they were tortured or killed in violent ceremonies. Some had been buried hastily, as if offered during times of great crisis, perhaps after floods or droughts, when the gods seemed most angry. These skeletons are silent now, but they testify to the central truth of Moche religion, that life and death were currency, and warriors were both collectors and offerings in that exchange. And yet, the warrior's life was not only battle and blood, he also embodied ideals of courage, loyalty, and honor. Young men trained to fight were celebrated, their portraits placed on vessels, their identities preserved for centuries. In a world without writing, the face of a warrior was his story. Picture a ceremony at dusk. The plaza is crowded, the air heavy with dust and expectation. Atop the Huaca, the ruler appears, his headdress gleaming, his costume painted with divine symbols. Priests flank him, masked and robed, holding knives of copper. Below, the captives kneel, their bodies painted, their fates sealed. The drums grow louder, the conch shells echo. A knife flashes in the firelight. Blood fills a goblet, lifted toward the darkening sky. The people watch, silent. In this moment, war, faith, and survival are one. Tonight, as we drift into quiet, let us imagine those warriors not only the captors, but also the captives. One triumphant, one bound, both playing their role in a cycle older than memory. For in the Moche world, every warrior carried two destinies: to conquer and to be conquered, to take blood and to give it, and in either fate, to serve the gods of blood and earth. When we think of the Moche, our minds often go to the towering huacas, the murals of sacrifice, the gleam of gold in royal tombs. But beneath the grandeur of temples and rulers lay another story, the quiet rhythm of everyday life. For centuries, thousands of ordinary men, women, and children lived in the valleys of northern Peru, shaping a world of work, family, and faith. Their voices are lost, yet their traces remain in clay pots, in tools of copper, in the very canals that once carried water through the desert. Let us step into their world, not as spectators of ritual, but as guests in their homes. The typical Moche dwelling was built of adobe bricks, sun-dried blocks of mud and straw. Houses stood close together, forming clusters near the rivers and fields. Walls were thick to keep out the desert heat. Floors were of packed earth, and roofs were flat, made of reeds or timber. Inside, spaces were modest. A hearth for cooking, storage jars along the walls, woven mats for sleeping. There was no luxury, but there was warmth, community, and continuity. Families were the heart of Moche society. Men worked the fields or fished the Pacific waters. Women spun cotton and llama wool, weaving cloth with intricate patterns. Children helped early tending animals, carrying water, learning the skills that would define their place in the world. Agriculture sustained all. Each day, farmers rose with the sun to tend maize fields, irrigating them with water drawn from the canals. They grew beans, squash, peanuts, and chili peppers. Cotton was a major crop, spun into thread for textiles and fishing nets. Food was stored in large ceramic jars, some decorated with painted designs. When harvests were plentiful, granaries were filled, ensuring security through drought years. But farming was never easy. A sudden El Niño flood could wash away fields in days. Drought could parch the soil for years. Every meal carried with it a silent prayer for balance. From the sea, the Moche drew another bounty. Fishing villages lined the coast, their people paddling out on small reed boats called cabalitos de totora, little reed horses. Light and swift, they allowed fishermen to ride waves, casting nets for anchovies, sea bass, and shellfish. Catch was dried or salted, then carried inland to feed valley towns. Fish bones, found in abundance at Moche sites, show how central the sea was to daily life. Food was simple but nourishing. Maize was ground into flour for bread or boiled into stews. Beans, peanuts, and squash enriched the diet. Chili peppers added fire. From the sea came fish, clams, and crabs. And from the highlands, llamas provided meat, wool, and transport. A fermented maize drink, chicha, was consumed at feasts, ceremonies, and daily meals alike. Imagine an evening meal in a Moche household, steam rising from clay pots, family gathered around the hearth, children eating hungrily, laughter mingling with the crackle of fire. Outside, stars blaze over the desert, while the river murmurs softly in the distance. Crafts and textiles filled daily hours as well. Women wove cotton into tunics, cloaks, and elaborate belts, dyed in earthy reds, yellows, and browns. Textiles were more than clothing, they marked identity, status, and role in society. A finely woven mantle could signal wealth, while patterned belts distinguished warriors or priests. Pottery workshops also flourished in villages. Some vessels were purely functional storage jars, cooking pots, water containers. Others carried decoration, geometric designs, animal motifs, or miniature scenes of daily life. The same artisans who created portrait vessels of rulers also shaped humble jars for households, linking every family to the broader Moche artistic tradition. Social gatherings brought the community together. Festivals linked to planting and harvest filled the plazas with music, dance, and feasting. Men played flutes and drums, women sang, children imitated the rituals of their elders. In these moments, the weight of survival was lightened by joy. Even common people, far from the grand ceremonies of sacrifice, found ways to celebrate life, and yet, faith infused even the smallest details. A fisherman might sprinkle offerings into the waves before setting out. A farmer might bury shells in a field as a prayer for fertility. Families placed offerings of food or pottery in household shrines. Life was never far from the gods. Every act was woven with ritual meaning. Death, too, was part of this cycle. Ordinary burials show people laid in simple pits, wrapped in textiles, with modest offerings of pottery or tools. They were not forgotten, but carried forward in memory, their spirits joining ancestors in guiding the living. What strikes us most is not the grandeur, but the balance of their lives. The Moche people lived between desert and ocean, between feast and famine, between gods and men. Their existence was fragile, yet full. They worked, they loved, they laughed, they worshipped. Their hands built the bricks of the Huacas, their harvests fed the lords, their nets filled the plazas with fish. Without them, there would have been no temples, no murals, no golden tombs. Imagine, now, a quiet morning in a Moche village. The air is cool before the sun rises. Farmers walk to the canals, carrying tools of wood and copper. Fishermen push reed boats into the surf, nets coiled at their feet. Women sit before looms, fingers flying as they weave. Children chase each other in the dust, their laughter carrying across adobe walls. This was the true heartbeat of the Moche, the simple rhythm of daily life, repeated generation after generation, until one day it was no more. Tonight, as we drift into sleep, let us remember them not only as builders of pyramids or performers of sacrifice, but as people who cooked meals, mended nets, sang songs, and dreamed beneath the same stars we see today. Their rulers are long gone, their temples are ruins, but in these ordinary acts, they are still with us. The land of the Moche was both gift and trial. It was a place where rivers carved green veins through desert sand, where the Pacific rolled endlessly to shore, where the Andes loomed like watchful giants to the east. But this world was never stable. It shifted and turned, offering abundance one year, and devastation the next. For the Moche, nature was not background. It was a living force, unpredictable, demanding, and sometimes merciless. The sky, the sea, the trembling earth, each carried signs that shaped their faith, their rituals, and their survival. The greatest force of all was El Niño. Every few decades, warm currents in the Pacific altered the climate along the coast. Suddenly, rain poured onto lands where it almost never fell. Desert valleys became torrents of mud. Fields were washed away, canals destroyed, villages drowned. The adobe walls of houses and temples, so strong in dryness, melted back into clay. The Moche had mastered water when it came in gentle streams from the Andes, but when the skies opened, nothing could hold it back. Excavations at Huaca de la Luna reveal layers of mud, evidence of repeated floods. Entire murals were buried, entire courtyards submerged, and still, the Moche rebuilt, brick upon brick, believing that ritual could restore balance. But El Niño had another face: drought. When warm waters spread in the Pacific, the Andean rains sometimes failed. Rivers shrank to trickles, canals dried, fields withered in the sun. Hunger spread through the valleys, granaries emptied. The people looked to their rulers and priests, asking why the gods had turned their backs. It is in these times that sacrifices grew most intense. Murals and burials show waves of offerings, captives slain in numbers greater than before. To the Moche, the disaster was not natural chance. It was divine anger, and only through blood could the balance be restored. The earth itself also betrayed them. The northern coast of Peru lies in one of the world's most active seismic zones. Earthquakes shook the valleys, splitting adobe walls, toppling temples, disrupting canals. Even the mighty Huacas cracked under the strain. For a people whose sacred mountains were built by human hands, such tremors must have carried deep spiritual meaning. Imagine standing in the plaza of the Huaca de la Luna as the earth trembles. The murals of gods shake, dust falls from the walls, crowds cry out in fear. To the Moche, this was not geology, it was a message. The gods of the earth were restless, and they demanded appeasement. The sea, too, was a constant source of omen. Fishermen knew its moods better than anyone. At times, the ocean was generous anchovies in vast schools, nets so heavy they tore from the catch. At other times, the sea grew barren. El Niño drove fish into deeper waters, leaving boats empty. Storms rose suddenly, capsizing reed boats, swallowing men whole. To the Moche, the sea was a god of dual nature, giver and taker, protector and punisher. Offerings of shells and fish bones found in temples show their prayers for its favor. Every journey onto the waves was both an act of survival and an act of faith. Signs in the sky also guided them. The movements of the moon and sun, the return of constellations, the eclipses that darkened the heavens, all were read as divine communication. The moon, especially, held power on the coast. Its cycles governed tides, fishing patterns, even agricultural rituals. An eclipse of the moon may have been terrifying, as if the divine order itself was being swallowed. Priests, standing atop the Huacas, likely read these celestial events to guide the community. A flood, a drought, an eclipse, all were woven into ritual calendars, all required response. Faith was the lens through which the Moche saw the natural world. For the Moche, disaster was never random. Floods, droughts, earthquakes, storms, these were signs, messages, demands. When nature struck, society responded not only with rebuilding, but with ritual. Sacrifices increased, ceremonies grew more elaborate, rulers appeared dressed as gods to reassure the people. But faith has limits. If floods returned again and again, if droughts stretched year after year, even the most loyal subjects began to doubt. Archaeological evidence suggests that by the 6th and 7th centuries, environmental stress contributed to unrest and collapse. Communities fractured, faith in rulers weakened, and the great Moche world began to unravel. Fields lie barren after years of drought. The rivers are thin, canals cracked with dryness. The sea has turned empty. Fishermen return with nothing. In desperation, priests call for greater offerings, captives sacrificed in numbers, blood flowing down the steps of the Huacas. But still, the rains do not come. Still, the gods remain silent. In that silence, the people begin to walk away. Villages are abandoned. Temples crumble. The whispers of collapse grow louder. And yet, through it all, the Moche never stopped watching the signs. The sky, the sea, the trembling earth, they were not mysteries to be solved, but messages to be heeded. Their rituals, their sacrifices, their very survival were woven into these forces. Tonight, as we rest, let us imagine lying beneath the Moche sky. Tonight, as we rest, let us imagine lying beneath the Moche sky. Stars blaze cold and clear. The moon rises, silver over the desert. In the distance, waves crash against the shore, and beneath the earth, unseen, the tremor of a restless world stirs. This was the life of the Moche, lived between abundance and disaster, between gift and punishment, between faith and fear, always watching, always reading, always listening to the signs in the sky and the sea. No civilization falls in a single night. The Moche, who once commanded valleys with their pyramids of clay and their mastery of water, did not vanish at the stroke of an enemy sword. Their decline was slower, like the drying of a river, like a flame guttering in the wind. It came from within and without, from earth and sky, from doubt and rebellion. For centuries, the Moche had endured the harsh rhythms of nature. Floods came, and they rebuilt. Drought came, and they prayed. But by the 6th and 7th centuries, disaster struck with a relentlessness that even faith could not contain. El Niño brought rains of terrifying force. Adobe walls melted into mud. Villages disappeared beneath torrents. Fields drowned. Murals at Huaca de la Luna were buried beneath layers of flood sediment, testimony to catastrophe after catastrophe. Then came the opposite. Drought, years of sky without rain, rivers reduced to trickles. The canals that had sustained valleys for generations cracked under the sun. Harvests failed. Hunger spread. The land that had once bloomed with maize and cotton now withered in dust. The people turned to their rulers and priests, who stood atop the huacas dressed as gods. Sacrifices grew more desperate. Captives bled on the temple steps in greater numbers, their blood carried in goblets, their heads displayed as offerings. But the rains did not return. The rivers remained thin. And in the silence of the gods, faith began to falter. What happens when prayers no longer work? What happens when the divine mask of power slips, and rulers are seen not as gods, but as men who cannot save their people? Archaeological evidence suggests that unrest and rebellion followed. At several Moche sites, murals were defaced, temples abandoned, structures left unfinished. It is as if the people themselves turned away from the old order, no longer willing to build, no longer willing to believe. In some valleys, smaller communities may have broken free from central rule, fracturing the unity that once bound the Moche world together. Civil strife, perhaps even civil war, gnawed at the empire from within. At Huaca de la Luna, excavations reveal signs of ritual violence, mass graves of young men sacrificed in a frenzy, as if priests sought to hold back chaos by feeding the gods with ever more blood. But faith is fragile when famine persists. The more the rulers demanded, the more their people may have doubted. And beyond the valleys, new powers stirred. Highland groups pressed down from the Andes, while coastal rivals challenged weakened communities. The Moche, once dominant, now found themselves besieged on every side. Their warriors still fought, but victories no longer assured prosperity, only survival. By the late 7th century, many of the great Moche centers were abandoned. The Huaca del Sol, once a mountain of clay alive with ceremony, was left to crumble in the sun. The Huaca de la Luna, with its murals of gods and sacrifices, fell silent. Villages emptied. Fields grew wild. The desert began its slow reclaiming of canals and plazas. Imagine those final days in a valley that had been home for centuries. A farmer stands in a cracked field, holding dry stalks of maize. His children are hungry, his canal empty. He looks toward the temple, where drums once thundered, but now the plaza is bare. The gods have not answered. The rulers have no solutions. And so, he gathers his family and walks away. One by one, families left their homes. Communities drifted apart. The great centers of power lost their people, their purpose, their voice. When the Moche were gone, the desert moved in. Adobe bricks, once hardened in sun, softened and melted under rain. Temples eroded into broken hills. Only fragments remained, murals buried under mud, pottery sealed in tombs, bones of sacrifices hidden in earth. The silence grew, until centuries later, no one remembered the names of the Moche. They had been lords of the desert valleys, builders of pyramids, masters of water, servants of gods of blood and earth. And yet, they too could not escape the weight of time, the wrath of nature, the frailty of faith. Tonight, as we let the quiet of history surround us, imagine walking among the ruins of the Huaca del Sol at twilight. The walls are broken, the bricks worn, the murals faded. Wind whistles through the cracks, carrying sand across the plaza. Where once stood thousands, now there is only emptiness. The gods painted on the walls stare silently, their fanged mouths open, but their voices gone. The Moche did not fall with a bang, but with a long sigh. A civilization undone by the very forces it had tried so hard to master. And in their abandonment, they left us a lesson. That even the greatest of builders cannot hold back the tide of earth, sky, and time. For more than 1,000 years, the valleys of northern Peru held their silence. The great Huacas, once alive with drums and chants, were reduced to eroded mounds of clay. The murals faded beneath layers of sand and mud. The names of rulers, the voices of priests, the cries of captives, all were forgotten. Only broken pots and scattered bones remained, half buried beneath desert winds. To local villagers, these ruins were simply huacas, sacred places left by ancestors long ago. Few could imagine that beneath the earth lay treasures as dazzling as any tomb of Egypt, or murals as vivid as any fresco of Rome. It was only in the modern age, with the patience of archaeologists, that the Moche would rise again from silence. The first whispers came in the early 20th century. Explorers noticed fragments of painted walls at Huaca de la Luna, broken ceramics scattered across valleys, and adobe mounds too vast to be natural. But looting was rampant. For decades, tomb robbers plundered the sites, scattering artifacts into black markets, tearing history apart for gold and silver. Much of the Moche story might have been lost forever. And then, in 1987, came a discovery that changed everything. Near the town of Sipán, archaeologist Walter Alva received reports of looters digging into an ancient huaca. He and his team intervened, beginning a careful excavation. What they uncovered stunned the world: the intact tomb of a Moche ruler, now known as the Lord of Sipán. Inside lay the remains of a man buried with breathtaking wealth. He wore a crescent-shaped headdress, necklaces of gold and turquoise, chest plates of silver, earrings shaped like warriors. Around him were symbols of authority, ceremonial scepters, shields, and a goblet for ritual blood. But he was not alone. His tomb also contained the sacrificed remains of guards, women, and animals, companions meant to serve him in the afterlife. It was a royal burial, as rich as that of Tutankhamun, earning him the title, the Tutankhamun of the Americas. For the first time, the grandeur of Moche rulers was revealed not through pottery fragments or murals, but through a burial untouched by looters, a window into their power and wealth. In the years that followed, more tombs were found at Sipán. Priests, warriors, and other lords, each buried with treasures of gold, silver, and copper. Together, they confirmed what pottery had long hinted. The Moche were a society of immense complexity, with rulers who commanded both wealth and divine authority. Meanwhile, at Huaca de la Luna, archaeologists uncovered murals of astonishing preservation. Layer after layer, buried by floods and protected by sand, revealed gods with fanged faces, warriors in procession, priests holding goblets of blood. The colors red, yellow, white, black were still vivid after 15 centuries. It was as if the ceremonies had been painted yesterday, waiting for the world to remember them. Excavations also uncovered mass sacrifice sites. Pits filled with young men, many with slit throats or broken bones. Their bodies confirmed the scenes shown in murals and pottery. What had once been dismissed as symbolic was revealed as historical truth. At other sites, El Brujo, Pampa Grande, San Jose de Moro, archaeologists uncovered more of the Moche world. El Brujo revealed the tomb of a powerful female ruler, the Lady of Tsao, buried with weapons, jewelry, and symbols of authority. Her discovery challenged assumptions that only men held power, showing that women, too, could rule as priestesses or queens. San Jose de Moro revealed richly adorned tombs of priestesses, their burials filled with fine ceramics and ritual objects. These finds suggested that women played central roles in Moche religion, guiding ceremonies and embodying divine power. Piece by piece, the Moche rose again not in conquest, but in knowledge. From the desert sands emerged faces of rulers, murals of gods, ornaments of gold, bones of captives. Archaeology became the voice of a civilization that had left no writing, but whose material culture spoke more vividly than words. Today, the treasures of Sipán rest in museums in Peru, displayed with pride as part of the nation's heritage. Visitors gaze at the golden headdresses, the necklaces of turquoise, the goblets of silver. In them, they see not only the power of a ruler, but the artistry of a people. At Huaca de la Luna, tourists walk among walls where gods still stare with open jaws, where the Decapitator God raises his knife eternally. Guides tell of rituals, sacrifices, and the faith of the Moche. The ruins are no longer silent, they speak to all who listen. And yet, there is still mystery. For every tomb uncovered, countless others remain hidden. For every mural revealed, many more are lost to erosion. The Moche still guard their secrets beneath layers of desert and time. Archaeologists continue to dig, to brush away sand, to piece together fragments. The story is not finished, it is still being written, one discovery at a time. Imagine walking through a museum at night. The lights are dim, the halls quiet. In a glass case stands the headdress of the Lord of Sipán, gold gleaming softly. Nearby, a portrait vessel stares with human eyes. Sculpted 15 centuries ago, it feels as though they are waiting for us to remember, waiting to tell us who they were. Tonight, as we close our eyes, let us hear their voices through the work of archaeology. The dig of a trowel, the brush sweeping away dust, the sudden gleam of gold in the sand. The Moche are no longer silent. Through tombs and temples, they speak again of glory, of faith, of life and death in a desert long ago. When a civilization fades, it is easy to imagine it gone forever. The temples crumble, the rivers run dry, the people move on, but traces remain, sometimes in gold and clay, sometimes in canals and bones, sometimes in lessons that echo across centuries. The Moche, though long vanished, left behind a legacy that still speaks in whispers of desert wind and ocean tide. The first, and perhaps most vivid legacy, lies in their art. Their portrait vessels, more lifelike than any others in the ancient Americas, show us the faces of individuals across 15 centuries. Wrinkled elders, stern warriors, gentle mothers, even the smiles of children, all captured in clay. Through them, the Moche remind us that history is not just rulers and temples, but people. Ordinary, fragile, human people. Their erotic ceramics, too, stand as an unflinching testament to a culture that saw life whole, without shame in the cycles of intimacy and fertility. In these vessels, the Moche preserved not only bodies, but beliefs that sexuality, reproduction, and renewal were woven into the sacred fabric of existence. Every pot, every vessel, every painted scene is a fragment of memory, carried forward through time. The Moche also left their genius in metal. Their mastery of gold, silver, and copper remains breathtaking even today. Necklaces that gleam with turquoise, headdresses shaped like crescents of the moon, ornaments cast with precision. These works rival the treasures of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Their techniques, hammering, casting, alloying, spread across the Andes, influencing later cultures, including the Chimu and the Inca. In museums, their treasures do more than dazzle. They speak of a people who saw beauty as inseparable from power, and who believed that artistry could touch the divine. Perhaps their most practical legacy lies in water. The canals they built, carrying river water across miles of desert, are among the most impressive feats of engineering in the ancient Americas. Some still trace the valleys today, reused by modern farmers. In a world increasingly shaped by droughts, floods, and climate change, the Moche stand as both inspiration and warning. They show us what can be achieved through cooperation and engineering, but also how fragile that balance remains when nature turns against us. The Moche also left a legacy of ritual and belief. Their ceremonies of sacrifice, so unsettling to modern eyes, were born of a worldview where humans and gods were bound by blood. They believed life depended on exchange. Give to the divine, and the divine will give in return. Though we may recoil from their methods, their rituals reveal a truth still relevant today: that societies seek meaning in chaos, that we search for order in forces beyond our control. In the story of the Moche, we hear echoes of our own questions. How do we endure disaster? How do we explain suffering? How do we find balance in a world that can be both generous and merciless? Another legacy is the role of women. The discovery of the Lady of Tao and the priestesses of San Jose de Moro revealed that women held positions of immense power in Moche society. They ruled, they performed rituals, they were buried with regalia equal to men. Their presence reminds us that leadership in the ancient world was more varied than we once believed, and that the voices of women shaped civilizations as much as those of men. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the Moche is a lesson about the fragility of civilization. For centuries, they mastered water, raised pyramids, fed thousands, and adorned their rulers with gold. And yet, they could not withstand the relentless weight of nature. Floods drowned their valleys, drought withered their crops, faith in rulers faltered, society fractured. Their fall reminds us that no matter how high we build, we remain bound to earth and sky. Civilizations rise not only by ambition, but by balance with the world that sustains them. And when that balance fails, even the mightiest can vanish into sand. Still, the Moche are not truly gone. Their temples, though eroded, still rise from the desert. Their murals still glow with color, their treasures gleam in museums, and their faces, sculpted in clay, still meet our gaze with eyes that seem alive. To walk among their ruins is to feel their presence. To study their art is to hear their voice. To remember them is to let them live again. Tonight, as we close this journey, imagine standing on the coast where the desert meets the Pacific. The waves crash against the shore. Behind you, the Andes rise in shadow. The wind carries sand across the valleys where canals once flowed, where pyramids once towered, where drums once echoed in the night. The Moche are gone, but the desert remembers, the sea remembers, the earth remembers, and through these whispers, so do we.